I get the question very frequently from audiences, from letters, by email, usually addressed in the following way. Mr. Krem, your story is very interesting. You say a lot of things which are very different from other people. It is usually addressed in the following words. Why should I believe you? In other words, prove it to me. Prove that what you're saying is true. What I'm saying is in the nature of prophecy, and you cannot prove a prophecy until it happens. My answer is always, I am not trying to prove it to you. I am not asking you to believe me. I am simply telling you what I understand and believe about the happenings of this time. And just by telling it, my work is being done. If I were really concerned whether you believed it or don't believe it, I would be a nervous wreck. Well, I may have jet lag and be old and decrepit, but I'm not yet quite a nervous wreck. What I am trying to do is simply present to you information which has come my way and hoping that you will keep an open mind, not necessarily believing it, but not rejecting it out of hand. And people say, oh, an open mind. I have an open mind, of course. I wonder, in my not too limited experience, I have found a truly open mind rarer than you would expect. Of course, we all imagine we have an open mind. But in reality, most of what we think, most of what we believe is the result of our conditioning from the cradle. Whether we have an open mind, a free mind, or a closed, conditioned mind depends on circumstances, how we're brought up, who were our teachers, what were our parents like, what kind of school did we go to, which country do we belong to. All these things condition our thinking and experience and determine whether we think for ourselves, whether we are really free or live in a conditioned circumstance. Of course, doing what I'm doing for over 30 years, I believe that what I'm saying is true. I believe we're living in a time in which the happenings are the most far-reaching, the most convulsive, the most changing of our world than anything you can possibly imagine. And change that is for the better for humanity. That the pain, the suffering, the stress, the tensions, the hideous happenings of the present in wars and cyclones and so on are passing, they're transitory, and are simply the birth pangs of a new civilization, which it is our privilege and our responsibility to make, to build. Whether you believe what I say is true or not, if you go home this evening with a renewed hope, hope for yourself, for your future, for your children, and for their future, then I shall be perfectly satisfied. As humanity will very soon come to understand, we are going through an extraordinary period of change on planet Earth.
I don't know how to tell a short story. I know, I'm sure. um, let's see.
If you are familiar with the story of Maitreya and Day of Declaration, etc., then an important thing you have to know is that this incident that happened on June the 11th, 1988, outside Nairobi in Kenya, is really the first time that we have something that is tangible about the story of Maitreya. Because we have not only an incident that happened before 6,000 people, so we have eyewitnesses, but also it's something that was caught, on film. So we have photos and we have personal testimonies by the editor of the Swahili edition of the Kenya Times, Job Mutungi. And he was brave enough to publish this story in the Kenya Times. And from there on, a lot of people became aware of this story. So for me, this is a very important moment because up to that point, there was only lectures by Benjamin Creme and work done by Share International. But after that incident, the whole world could have independent confirmation that something is happening.
The 11th of June, 1988, in Nairobi, a most extraordinary event. There's a woman in Nairobi called Mary Akatsa, who is a fundamentalist Christian. She doesn't believe in Maitreya at all. She believes in the Christ. She's a very devout Christian. She held this meeting just outside the town, and she has 6,000 followers. And we have photographs taken there showing them thousands, 6,000 people. And she said, God has spoken to me, and we're going to be visited by a great being, somebody very, very important. And suddenly, just beside her, stood this figure of Maitreya, dressed in a long white robe with a white headdress with a blue band round the headdress. And he had a fly whisk in his hand. And he's a tall figure, much taller than the people around. He's actually 6 feet 3 inches tall, and slim, wide-shouldered, and he spoke to the crowds, and they all said, ah, ah. They thought he was the Christ. They immediately saw him as the Christ or Jesus, because they're Christians, so they would think Christ Jesus. So, Jesus, Jesus, Christo, Christo, help me, save me. They were all there for healing. She's an extraordinary healer because Maitreya gives healing through that woman, Mary Akatsa. There's a man called Job Mutungi, who was the editor of the Kenya Times at the time, the Swahili editor of the Kenya Times, and he wrote it up in the Kenya Times. Did the Christ come to Nairobi this day? We got in touch with him, and he came over here and interviewed me for the story and so on, and he described it. He said it was quite extraordinary. He said the Saturday before, the week before, he was in the town, centre of the town, and he saw a star going round and round, it wasn't an aeroplane, it was a star. And it was silently going round and round the town. He said it reminded me of the Star of Bethlehem, that the wise men followed into the town. But he didn't know anything about it. He just saw it. He said, oh my, this must be a portent. This must mean something very big is going to happen. But he didn't know what, and nothing happened except that, which was big enough. The week later, Mary Akatsa said, a great being is coming, and just suddenly, miraculously, out of nowhere, came Maitreya. He spoke to the crowd in perfect, unaccented Swahili for maybe 15, 20 minutes, something like that. And he told Mary Akatsa at one point to put her hand in his pocket, and she said in the pocket were 4 crosses made of gold, big crosses like that. And she pulled one out, and we have a photograph of her holding the cross up like that. Big cross, about 14, 15 inches high, like that, made of gold. And then he healed about 40 or 50 people standing in the area where he was. Then he said, now I have to go, but I will be back with, they said, a bucket full of blessings. But my master said he didn't say a bucket, but they translated it as bucket. He said a vessel. I will be back with a vessel full of blessings. And he said, I have to go. And somebody there, one of the group there, said, well, I have a car. Can I take you to the station? So he got in the car, but he only went about 100 yards. And they said, I have to get out here. So he got out of the car and walked away. And he took a few steps and just disappeared, literally disappeared again. That was all over the world. CNN, BBC, Japanese television. It just covered the world for 2 days. But, you know, it wasn't football, it was the Christ, it wasn't too important, and so it just disappeared. It just became nothing.
There is a coincidence of events that perhaps prepared people in Nairobi about what happened. So there was a climate, let's say, of expectation or of openness for people to accept this event. And of course, the most important thing is that at the time that it happened, there were people who took these photographs, and there was also Job Mutungi, who was able to use his credentials as a journalist, a respected member of his society, in order to make public this story. Many explanations depending on what your background is, but these are undeniable things. The star, for instance, is something that thousands of people have seen, and probably hundreds of videos have been taken. So you can argue and you can disagree about the explanation, but the phenomenon is there.
The Day of Declaration is a tremendous event coming forward very quickly now to humanity. It is a day, it will go down in history as the Day of Days, as an incredible turning point for the consciousness, the awareness of humanity about their own divine nature, coming in contact with and coming into an understanding of our place here in the evolutionary scheme of our planet. Until this time, largely, we've been working with, and particularly at this time in history, we've been working as a humanity without a real sense or knowledge of our internal divine nature. We know it as a theory, we have it as an idea, and certainly religion teaches that there is a divine aspect to ourselves, but we don't know it as an actual fact, as a knowingness about ourselves. It's one thing to have a theory that there are trees in a forest. It's another thing to actually walk in the forest and see the trees and know they're actually there. And so the Day of Declaration is a day coming forward very soon when Maitreya, out of the request of humanity, the demands of humanity to know more, to hear more from him, will step forward, and the networks around the world will link together their broadcast. You'll be able to see Maitreya on the television set throughout the world at an appointed time, a specific time that will be advertised far ahead. And you'll be able to see him on TV, but you won't hear him. There'll be no volume or sound on your TV, but you'll hear him inwardly, telepathically, in your own mind. And you'll hear him in your own language, and he's going to speak to humanity about who we are, the long evolutionary process that has brought us to the point that we are, and the long road ahead of us. And at the same time, we'll experience our own divine nature for a moment, for a few minutes, or 5 or 10 minutes. We'll experience our own inner divine nature. We'll experience that oneness with all human beings, who we are as a soul, and what the relationship is that is to all other human beings and to all other kingdoms of nature. So we'll understand more clearly our relationship to one another, our relationship to the environment, to the world, and our relationship to God and to the underlying divinity of all things. And understanding that will change our direction tremendously moving into the future, because the change will come, the impetus, the aspiration to move forward and make the changes that we know we need to make. That will come from our own inner aspiration now. It will come from our own divine impulse to correct those relationships, to know that if we hurt someone else, we're hurting ourselves, that we're a part of this unfolding plan. And we'll know that we have a part, a responsible part to play in this unfolding plan. Now, not everyone is going to move forward in the way that I think we would all hope. Everyone will have this experience, but the individual human beings have free will, and the masters never infringe upon that free will. And so we will have this experience. It will come about as a result of a large part of humanity invoking this forward, crying out for it, asking Maitreya to speak to the world, and then in that response we will be given this experience of ourselves. But then it's up to us to really deal with that in our own philosophy, in our own ideas, within our own belief systems. And some individuals may think that this is a trick of some sort, a mind control trick, or a hypnosis, a mass hypnosis, while others will know this to be within their heart an experience from their own nature of who they are, that it will open their heart, that they will know it to be more true now than anything else that they have ever known. And in this experience, millions of people will also be cured, healed instantly of many different diseases physically. This energy coming through from their own soul, from their own heart, will heal them of cancers and emotional illnesses, psychological illnesses, all kinds of physical illnesses, and will be evidence to millions and millions of people that this event was a profoundly changing event for the human heart, for the human way forward. So enough individuals, millions and millions or tens of millions of people, will now know that this is our destiny, will take that newfound divinity and move forward to solve the problems of the world, driven by their own inner divine aspiration and inspiration.
Finding out about Maitreya's presence in the world has really affirmed my innate trust in things that I can't really see. And I've worked in my artwork and in my video production a lot with what other people call coincidence, and I tend to call miracles. I've even spoken about miracles, working with creating thought forms and intention and having things happen. So I was kind of primed for what happened with Crosses of Light. It was just a buildup of all of these circumstances that you could call serendipity or coincidence. But what happened was my husband, I live in Northern California, my husband got his dream job with Disney in Southern California, and suddenly we were moving, and I had my established production company in Northern California, and it's like, oh my God, why am I going down there? And within a few days of hearing that news, I got a phone call saying there seems to be some miracles happening in Southern California. So I went, okay, I guess that's why I'm going there. So I we packed up and I got down there, and I was, my friend who had told me about this said there's these crosses appearing in windows. Now, you have to know that I had been aware of the Maitreya information, and the latest prediction coming out of that information through Share International was that there would be a flood of new miracles, including crosses of light that would be appearing all over the world, and it would boggle men's mind, and that Maitreya and the masters were creating this to bring attention to his presence. So I went, oh my God. So when I got down to LA, before I even finished unpacking, I grabbed up my camera and went out and saw the first cross of light. And I just have to say, as a documentary producer and a trained investigative journalist, I have to just put aside anything that isn't proven. So I've got this interesting thing going on inside of me of trusting my intuition and believing in miracles, and yet having to really vet everything that I hear. So I come at my work purposefully with skepticism. So this cross of light was shining through a bathroom window. I couldn't see it. The people who lived there put a ladder up so I could climb up. And I climbed up the ladder. I had, in those days, 30 years ago, my camera was black and white. So I climbed up the ladder looking even through the black and white viewfinder, and my reaction was, oh my God. And I felt something in my heart region, and all I could say is I don't know that I'd ever experienced peace before. People talk about peace and the peace that passeth understanding, and those words went through my mind. The peace that passeth understanding. It was as if someone had their hands resting just ever so lovingly and gently on my shoulders. And I took the camera down and looked, and here was this golden cross. And so I knew that's why I was down there and had to do this documentary. So I did pre-interviews. I found many, many people who had done so many more than I ever included in the documentary. People who had had healings from everything from blindness, just so many different things. And I did pre-interviews with everybody, and then I raised the money and put together a television crew, and we went out and did the whole thing. And boy, I myself had suffered from tremendous migraines for a very long time, and I'll never forget the day of the last interviews. I'd interviewed 3 or 4 people with miracles during the afternoon, and at the end of it, suddenly I said, oh my God, my migraines are gone. And I had been sitting in the room with one of these crosses of light, and I just started weeping with gratitude. So that's that story. That's the story behind the story.
The second extraordinary event taking place now simultaneously with the change from one age into another age is the coming forward into the everyday world of these masters of wisdom. For countless thousands of years, the masters have lived in the remote mountain and desert areas of the world, unknown by the vast majority of people. They have known for over 500 years that sooner or later they would be required to come back into the everyday world where once they lived as ordinary people. And until recently, relatively recently, it was thought it would probably be 1,200, 1,300 years yet before the masters could come into the world, before we were ready for the entry of the masters. But with the creation of the atomic bomb, the head and leader of that group, whose personal name is Maitreya, Maitreya the World Teacher, made an announcement in June 1945, exactly at the end of the war, that if humanity, of its own free will, a free will which is never abused by hierarchy, it is sacrosanct and never infringed by the masters. If humanity, of its own free will, would take just the first steps to create right human relationships, to put its house in order, then he, Maitreya, and a group of his disciples, the Masters of Wisdom, would come into the world and begin the process of teaching and working with humanity on a completely different and totally known basis. It was hoped that Maitreya could come in about 5 years, around 1950. But the nations did nothing. They simply quickly went back to the old ways, the old greedy, selfish, competitive ways of the past, in which they are totally locked today. So his coming was put back and put back and put back. And in 1975, 5 masters took up position in 5 major spiritual centers of the world. One came into west to east, but not in any order of importance. One into New York, one into London, one into Geneva, one into Darjeeling, and one into Tokyo. Later, 2 more, one into Moscow and one into Rome. They were added to, until today, there are 14 masters in the world. Eventually, there will be about 40 masters in the world. And in July, Maitreya himself announced, "I am coming whether they are ready or not." On the 8th of July, 1977, Maitreya descended from his mountain in the Himalaya. It's about 17,000 feet up. He descended into the plains in Pakistan, stayed some days in Pakistan to climatize a body which he had been creating for this purpose, a body self-created which allows him to live at our level and at the same time bring in his consciousness as the embodiment of the Christ principle, the love energy of God, as the world teacher, to do his work as the world teacher for all humanity. After some days in Pakistan, he came by aeroplane into London, England, and made his, what he calls his point of focus in the modern world, the Asian community of London, England. Since July 19th, 1977, Maitreya has lived in London, as yet undeclared as who, in fact, he really is. The people around him know he is someone very, very special indeed, but most of them do not know exactly who and what he is and does. Christians await the return of the Christ. And by the Christ they mean Jesus. Actually, Jesus is not and was not the Christ. He was the body for the Christ. He was the physical plane expression of the Christ by being overshadowed by Maitreya for the last 3 years of his life. For the last 3 years, from the baptism to the crucifixion, Jesus acted as the vehicle for the Christ, the embodiment of the Christ principle, which is Maitreya, who overshadowed him and manifested through him exactly in the same way as 600 years earlier, the Buddha manifested through his disciple, the Prince Gautama. Gautama was not the Buddha, but he was the vehicle for the Buddha being overshadowed by Gautama. So Jesus, for these 3 years, exemplified, spoke to the people, and they heard and understood or misunderstood the teachings of Maitreya through Jesus. Christians await the return of Jesus. When? They have no idea. The one who was Jesus is now the master who is in Rome.